just to remind anyone who might have got here by accident, we're meeting with Mr. Emanuel Josey and his team from the Thorium network. They will be talking about thorium technology, thorium reactors, how they potentially could interact with molten salt reactors. And we could also touch on the applicability of this technology specifically in the context of Armenia and Armenia's energy systems. So, to warn all of you, the meeting is being recorded so that we are able to share it later with other viewers. All right, Jeremiah, I'll pass the word to you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here tonight to meet everyone, and to all the people who will be watching the recording later on. Thank you for the opportunity to share our story of thorium for the world. That's why we have this globe behind us, just here. So ostensibly we're Swiss-based, but the world is our agenda, and that's the reason for us doing our project. So we'll do what we'll do, as I would suggest. Well, first thing is, how long do we have for this conversation? Shall we go for an hour?
We have
or
about,
less?
We have about, I would say about an hour overall. So I think roughly half an hour on your presentation and talks, 30 to 35 minutes, and then the rest we'll do some discussion and Q&A.
Oh, that's great. So what we'll do is we'll talk about thorium. I'll introduce the members as we get to different parts of the story. I'll introduce the members to discuss a little bit about themselves, particularly with Dian and his position as the chief nuclear scientist for the project. We have a lot to discuss there. And then when we go through the Q&A, it'd be great if we can get your team to talk about the interest areas and the focus areas of the group, because as I understand, this is what I'd say is the young energy professionals of Armenia. Is that a good summary of the group?
Yeah, that's we're the group organizing the meeting, but here we have in the room actually various professionals, older professionals from Armenia, from different spheres who are interested in the topic.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. All right, well, what I'll do is I'll talk about the Thorium Network as a global project, and I'll talk about it specifically, how it can relate to Armenia. Actually, I could say that the project was kicked off when I had a meeting with the Minister of Natural Resources and Energy. I think you guys turned the other around, natural resources and energy, yeah, that's right, in May of 2017. I can't remember his name now, but I met him and we were talking about getting access to the spent nuclear fuel, which is in Armenia. Well, maybe it's there, maybe it's in Russia now. But nevertheless, the spent nuclear fuel, which has come out of Smrs in Armenia, there is enough energy in that spent fuel for about 20 years of power generation in Armenia using molten salt technology. So we know Armenia's landlocked status. We know the geopolitical situation in Armenia. And energy is a key importance to such a small country. And one of the things about thorium molten salt is it really does redefine the way that the energy politics is played around the world, because almost every country has thorium. Thorium is non-weaponizable. You can't make weapons from it. And the only thing you can do is really make energy, and you get lots and lots of energy from it, particularly if you put it into a molten salt format, which is what was done back in the 1950s and 1960s in the US. So this technology is proven. It's not theoretical, it's not experimental. And all that work was done many, many years ago, kind of in the sort of the cloak and dagger era of the Cold War, whilst people were busy trying to make weapons. We have what we would say a proliferation of solid fuel systems all around the world. Smrs is one such system. And a solid fuel system is inherently very poor at converting the fuel into energy. You typically only end up with up to 3% of the fuel content converted to energy before the fuel is poisoned by neutron grabbing elements. And that's the whole, well, I suppose the other side of that is that's how these power stations were first started up. As they're not power stations, they were plutonium factories, and that's hence the proliferation of them around the world. That's just the way the world works. However, when you switch to a molten salt state, you're able to completely access the energy that's in the fuel, in the fissile material, and extract that as energy, and you end up with very, very little waste and a high conversion to energy. Hence, you need a very small amount of fuel compared to the energy output. We've estimated, and other people have done the estimates as well, about 250 grams of thorium metal is required to supply the energy requirements of a person for their entire life. Now, I'm talking energy for not just heating and cooling, or having dinner here as well. We just been on the road for the last couple of hours and pulled up at a restaurant I know of. So excuse me while the wine might be being passed around. So the concept is that the 250 grams will provide a person with all of the energy requirements for their life. We've got, this is from heating, cooling, transport, food production and clothing. So a very, very small amount of material is required for such a large output of energy. And as a result of that, you can imagine that geopolitics just gets turned on its head. No longer would any country be reliant on other country to supply its gas or coal or oil. Any country could become sovereign and independent in power production, which is a very, very big thing. Now, I can talk a little bit more about the technology. Actually, I might let Diane do that in a little bit, if you don't mind, Diane. But the key for Armenia, which is very, very interesting, is that Armenia, being landlocked, has one of the nuclear reactors located there, Metsamor, 30 kilometers from Yerevan. The scientific knowledge of Armenians is extremely high. The nuclear knowledge of Armenians is extremely high as well because of Metsamor. However, there's no plans to build a new, not that I know of. There might be actually. I recall now Rosatom having talks to build a new NPP in Armenia. The opportunity for Armenia is to instigate a molten salt development program. And I'll touch on a little bit on that's happening around the world. And then we'll flick to a bit of discussion on what thorium molten salt is and cover that. But before we do, so who else is doing thorium molten salt? I explained before that the technology was proven back in the 50s and the 60s by the US government funding Oak Ridge National Laboratories in Tennessee. They finished their program in 1969 when they shut off the test reactor, which was running at about 8 to 9 megawatts. And they produced a final report, which they published in 1972, requesting for $1 billion of 1972 dollars to build the first commercial molten salt. Once it got to that high level of now we need $1 billion, please, but they'd spent probably 130 million over 20 years getting to that point. The government at the time, run by Nixon, very, very openly and bluntly shut it all down. The people at the program were told to destroy their information, destroy the documents. The head of the director of the institute was sacked. They changed the law in the country to make it illegal to research liquid fuels, and then set about to suppress all information regarding the program. And this is not no conspiracy here. You can read about that. The author, or the director of the facility, was an author of many books discussing the exact same issues. And in fact, one of our team members was actually on that program. He's now 85 years old. So a lot's been going on since that time. Now, and part of the reason I'm in Turkey is that Turkey has its own thorium reserves and is planning to develop its own technology for thorium molten salt. Japan has ambitions, so does Russia, France. Australia has technology that they've been helping China with. China is one of the largest, most public groups that have been promoting or pursuing molten salt technology. And on the private sector, Bill Gates is getting involved just recently. Now, publicly, he's been involved in nuclear energy for a while, particularly with his traveling wave technology with terrestrial energy. However, molten salt technology is relatively new investment for him. And he started this investment after the Trump administration blocked him from helping China. This is in October 2018. Trump said no to Bill Gates. So he then promptly turned around. So Bill Gates now has a deal with France, with Orano, the British with Core Energy, and with Southern Company, which is the largest utility in USA. So on the commercial side, this is the space to be in. As I said, we originally started this project by going to Armenia and sitting down and negotiating the spent nuclear fuel there. The answer I got was no, but that's how that goes. And here we are 4 years later. A lot has happened. A lot of companies and countries are now pursuing the technology at a very aggressive level. I could say that the Chinese announced an investment of 3.3 billion. Just go to them. Cheers while I just have a quick drink. Cheers, everyone. So, not as good as Armenian wine. So, the Chinese announced 3.3 billion investment in 2011, and the money just keeps getting bigger. We've actually got a €1 billion fund we're establishing in Liechtenstein. $500 million. No, 250 million of that will be allocated to building a thorium molten salt burner. We haven't chosen the location yet, but that's on our agenda. And the remaining 750 will be invested into cash flow producing projects, particularly in the rare earth space. There's a big tie-up with rare earths with thorium molten salt technology. So on that sort of introduction generally on the world status, Diane, would you like to talk a little bit about the technology itself?
Gladly. Armen, you're just going to have to help me a little bit here because I'm not sure who of your guests here, what their knowledge is on nuclear energy. So I'm going to try and try and keep it within limits. The big advantage of molten salt reactors over conventional solid fuel reactors is basically in the word liquid versus solid. And what happens in a nuclear reactor is you got the uranium and it gets split. So you got your two fission products. And these fission products, most commonly, one is xenon, 135, and you got another different fission product. But the xenon is the more important one for now, and it's a gas. And what's nice about liquid is that gas can move through a liquid and we can get it out. It also means that because it's fluid, moving constantly, you can constantly add stuff to it. So you can take bad stuff out, like xenon, and you could put more fuel in the form of thorium, uranium, and stuff like that, which brings out a lot of very interesting things. It allows you to improve the neutronics, basically, how good does the fuel burn? You can add more fuel. So imagine you have, the best way I can describe it is with a car. If you put petrol into a cylinder, it burns. And now you've got bad gases going out. With molten salt, I can get that into the exhaust pipe and I can get it out. Whereas with a solid fuel reactor, the bad stuff stays in there. I've still got enough fuel to run for who knows how long, or 18 months in this case, but the bad stuff stays there. What I can also do is that I can put fuel in there, so I can continuously put fuel into my fuel tank. And that's the nice advantage of the molten salt reactor over conventional light water or solid fuel reactors. Other advantages of it is really that brings it out to thorium. Now, you see, the problem with thorium is that by itself it is fertile but not fissionable. The thorium is 3 times more abundant than uranium, and if you can go and look at uranium itself, only about 0.9, 0.7% of uranium that you dig out of the ground is actually fissile. So you have to do all kinds of enrichment and chemical processes and all kinds of stuff just to get there. Now, what's nice about the molten salt reactor is I can put it somewhere where it becomes fissile. I'm not going to go into the details of that. If anybody has any questions on that, I can explain that later. And then what happens is I can use the liquid state of the molten salt reactor to essentially get things in and out. So I can get, like I said, bad stuff I can get out and I can get more fuel in. So effectively, I can operate a nuclear reactor for as long as what I need to, or as long as what the regulator says I have to run it before I have to shut it down. And that could potentially be 5-6 years. Now, the other big, very important thing is what Jeremiah mentioned, which is the fuel utilization, if I can call it that. Now, a typical light water reactor, you use about, it depends on where you read in literature, between 1% and 5% of the usable fuel that's present in the reactor. With a molten salt reactor, shall I say, you utilize 99%. 95% of the fuel that comes out as nuclear waste, if I can call it that, is still usable. I can still treat that and put it straight back into the reactor and continue to use it as fuel. And that's actually amazing if you think about it, that if you go and stand outside a nuclear reactor, whatever the age of that reactor is, whether it's 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, all the nuclear fuel that has gone into that nuclear reactor is still present on site. But we can still take all that fuel, convert it, put it in a thorium molten salt burner, and we can use all that fuel. Imagine all that power that you can actually still exploit going forward. And that's really one of the big advantages of a molten salt reactor. There are other advantages, like it's a passive cooling. It's got its what do they call it? Gen 4 safety systems, like the salt plug that drains everything out. There's different ways which they manage that as well. And I'm not going to really go into that. But what's interesting is that this is really a reactor design that is one step above what we have now with the light water reactor. And the reason I can say that is because of the gentleman who designed the original light water reactor. Jeremiah, you're going to have to help me with the name. I can't remember. It was not Rick over the first gentleman. I can't remember. But he designed the light water reactor for design in submarines.
Yeah, I can go to that in a minute. I'll let you keep going, Dion. I'll come in later.
No problem. And then he actually stopped working on the light water reactor because he developed something better in the form of a molten salt reactor. So a molten salt reactor is it's a natural evolution of a nuclear reactor because of all the advantages in which it gets. So just to go back 5 steps. What's nice about the molten salt reactor? Well, one, you get all the bad stuff out. So all your long-lived radioactive isotopes, which is generally speaking transuranics, uranium, plutonium, stuff like that, can go back in and you can burn it. And you get your bad stuff. You can actually put that in a much smaller container. Because you get the bad stuff out, it means that your operation inside the reactor, your neutronics, is much better. You can refill it. So you don't have to switch off after 18 months. You can continue for 2, 3, 5, 6 years. The only limitation you have is if your regulator says you have to switch off after every 5 or 6 years for regular maintenance. Another big, very nice option is that you can go much higher temperatures than a conventional light water reactor. Conventional light waters can only go up to about 300, 330 degrees. This one goes all the way up to 600-700 degrees. And if you go and look at energy conversion from heat to electricity, the more higher the temperature, the more efficient it is. I'm not going to go into the details of that. And those are just those tiny little building blocks that makes molten salt just so much better. Because a light water reactor or solid fuel reactor has the disadvantage of it's stuck. What you put in, that's what you get. And because once it comes out, it's highly reactive, you can't work with it as much. With a molten salt reactor, because it's a liquid system, you can design it to move through the system. You can design it to do what you need it to do. With a solid system, once you've built the bricks, they can't go anywhere. I hope that gives a very simple explanation of a molten salt reactor. I'm sure there are 1,000 questions, and if anybody needs me to explain a little bit more of the safety systems on a molten salt reactor, please allow me to do that. Ask away. There was one other very important one that I actually did forget, and that is the pressure inside molten salt, and that is that it's an atmospheric. Now, a problem with light water reactors is the operation temperature within the reactor is something in the region of 20, 15, 25 megapascals. So you have to build a giant containment dome on top of it. So if something blows, it's contained. You don't need that with a molten salt. And that was one of the big construction costs, capital costs of most nuclear plants. And that's one of the big safety systems in a nuclear plant. You don't have that. And because of, again, it's a liquid, you could put it into a non-critical configuration and just dump it into critical configuration. So just by virtue of moving the material from point A to point B, I can switch a nuclear reaction on and off, just on and off. I hope that explains it for you. And please, like I said, ask away.
I think that was quite good. If I may jump in, because indeed most of us here are not nuclear energy professionals. Certainly none of from our team. But just to summarize, and you tell me if I got it right. The main advantages are the nuclear waste management, specifically the pollutant, the toxic parts. And because it's a liquid, it's easier to get it out through the liquid. Yes. When you do refueling, you don't need to stop the reactor. You can continuously refuel it, providing fuel in and out. One part which might have been hard to catch for some of our audience when you were discussing the fissile bit. So and I'll try to explain it. So for a radioactive reaction to go on, you bombard an element with neutrinos basically, and if it's fissile, then it will be then there will be fission happening. It will be falling apart and emitting energy. And the problem with thorium is that it is not fissile. So you can bombard with neutrinos, it will absorb them, but it will not fall apart. And what you're saying is that without going into the specifics, if you combine it with a molten salt, then it becomes fissile. So there is no longer this problem of it of having another fissile material.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the last one, if you could, I think I forgot the last one.
No worries, it'll come back. No problem.
It'll come back. I think it was the safety and the pressure of it. As we were talking, something which I don't want to go into it, but from a weapons proliferation, plutonium proliferation, thorium, you can't really make a bomb from it. Both the US and the UK have tried and failed. And that's basically where I'm going to stop it. As for plutonium, once it's gone through light water reactors, the way in which the neutrons affect the plutonium causes it to become not weapons grade. Let me put it that way. And there's a lot of argument that because I've got a liquid flowing through the core, if I have plutonium, that I can produce more plutonium. But the problem is that that's not actually entirely possible. There are ways of mitigating that. Jeremiah, I'm sure you've got ideas on that and explaining that. But what I can say is that because of the high efficiency of the fuel that you are burning up inside the reactor, any plutonium that goes in is going to get burned up. So any long-lived bad stuff that you can get rid of via a nuclear reactor by bombarding it with neutrons, you can get rid of it. And that's what's beautiful about the molten salt. As for extracting plutonium and then getting weapons-grade material out and stuff like that, there are mitigating measures that in place that make sure that that does not happen. And also because of the way the thing operates, the probability or the chances of you getting that stuff out is very difficult to impossible because you're going to design it that it's impossible.
And to jump in again, I remember the last advantage that you mentioned. It's something that is known as conversion rate in nuclear.
Yes.
So
Reading.
there is you start, again, going back to this idea of fissile materials, you start with a certain amount, and normally you have only a small amount left that you can reuse after the end of a chemical reaction. But with molten salt nuclear reactors with thorium, you can have up to 95% conversion rate from what I understand, and that means that most of the material you will be able to reuse again for another cycle, and so it becomes much more self-sufficient and much less reliant on external supply of fissile materials.
Yes, that actually brings us to two other advantages of the molten salt reactor. The first is that because it's operating in the thermal sector, the method of producing plutonium, you require what they call fast neutrons. So you've got two types of neutrons when it gets released, fast neutrons and thermals, or fast and slow. And with thorium, you can breed with slow neutrons, but you can't breed plutonium with slow neutrons. So there's your one mitigating. The second mitigating thing is that because of the nature of thorium, I'm not going to go into detail, you actually end up with more fuel than you store it. So if you start it off with 1 kilogram of usable fuel, you'll end up with, say, 1.1 kilograms of fuel. And that will just continue to build up. The next big thing that's very important, which people will ask, why don't you use thorium in light water reactors? Well, the first answer is because they're not licensed for it. That's one of the main reasons. And people are scared of it. And I know why. Because they've done it in the UK and they actually, again, produced more fuel than they put in. The second thing is that what also is a problem is the radioactivity that gets produced post thorium utilization is more aggressive, but doesn't last as long. It's a long story how that works, but let's go with just it's more aggressive. But because of where it's placed, it's not a danger to anybody. And in order to fully utilize thorium, you need to be able to recycle it. And because of the danger aggressive, you can't recycle the thorium in the fuel rods. The molten salt reactor, because of its very design, allows you to do that. Because it's in a liquid state, it means I can recycle it. I don't have to dissolve it in a nitric acid or in a special facility and expose people to it. I can just do that immediately.
Yeah, I think that gives us all a good idea of what the advantages are. We have a question from Rudolf Yaganyan, and I wanted to ask Jeremiah and Dr. Kemp if you'd prefer to take the questions on the go or at the end in the Q&A.
Well, I think like we're past 35 minutes into the call, so why don't we get into the Q&A now, and we can probably pick up the fill up the gaps in terms of the knowledge transfer on the first part of the conversation.
Yeah, so Mr. Yaganyan, if you want to ask the question.
It's all right if I mute myself and ask the question, yes?
Yeah.
Please do.
So, my name is Rudolf Yaganyan. I'm a recent graduate from Imperial College London, where I specialized in energy policy. And now I work as a consultant at the Climate Compatible Growth Program. And my questions are a bit diverse, if I'm honest with you. One thing I want to clarify first, has there been a reactor of this type built yet or nothing so far?
Yes, it has been built.
Okay, so if it has been built, is there any chance of either yourself or from somewhere where data could be found to model such a reactor for, let's say, an energy scenario for Armenia? Because I work quite extensively on modeling energy scenarios for Armenia, and I was wondering if there's data available and whether I could include this in my model.
Yep. So very good question. Thanks, Rudolf. So the best modeling or the best data that's available is from the actual experiment that was done from 1965 till 69. The information that was produced during that that experiment, funny enough, more and more has been being put onto the internet by Oak Ridge only in the last 10 years. So it's really, really fortuitous that the internet gives us this ability to access information. And all your questions could be answered if you went direct to Oak Ridge. However, there's a lot of countries already very, very advanced in the very same question, seeking answers to this very same question. France, China, Turkey are very advanced in that. In fact, we know France have made it public. We all know that France is an extremely nuclear-focused country, but they made it public in October of 2018 that they were switching all their research into molten salt technology. So they're extremely advanced in how to fit the energy profile of thorium molten salt power generation into a country's energy grid system. So yeah, Rudolf, the information is available. We can work with you after the call to get you the right connections so you can have the right conversations to model Armenia appropriately. From my own knowledge, Metsamor is 50 or a little bit % less of what energy is required in Armenia. There's Rudolf, because you're working, I suppose I will say this about the renewables sector, and you can look at Germany as an example of what's happened there. Germany has doubled the cost of their energy, whilst now, last month or the month before, announcing they're turning back on their coal-fired power stations, whilst they're building more gas pipelines to their country, despite spending billions on PV and wind. So, you may say, people say, "Oh, this is just a transitionary period while they get into the full sector." We've done our own calculations, which show, and this I'll say this slowly so the numbers are clear. If you had a requirement of 1 gigawatts of power generation requirement, and you said, well, I'm going to install wind and solar to provide that with nothing else, it's not just and everyone knows because of the intimacy of renewables, it's not just doubling or tripling the amount of installed capacity that you need to give reliability, 100% reliability you need for that 1 gigawatt. You need a minimum of 20 gigawatts. Our estimates say it's actually more like 40 to 45 gigawatts of installed capacity to provide a 100% reliable 1 gigawatt. That's just unfeasible. Now, that's the science, that's the physics. When you get behind the numbers and you say, well, why is Germany failing, so to speak, in terms of this renewable space? That's why. So the fossil fuel industry is very, very eager to support renewables because they know, when you get down and look at the numbers, as us, I mean, I'm pretty sure that all of us are scientists and engineers in this call. When you look at the numbers tell you what's got to happen. And so the fossil fuel companies are very happy to promote wind and solar because they know that for every gigawatt of wind or solar that's installed, they've got an additional 1 gigawatt of power generation will be installed as backup. And that's just how energy production works. So Rudolf, I know it's a long answer, but have I answered you?
Yes, thank you for your answer. And there's been also a link that has been sent in the chat. Thank you for that. And yes, I would like to be in contact with you actually regarding this. And to add on top of the point that you just last said, so from my modeling exercise that I've done so far, I've given a scenario comparison of whether we follow a full green policy with wind and solar, and in comparison whether most of the technology is actually replaced by a new nuclear power plant. And the cost estimates show that it is $7 billion cheaper to replace a new nuclear power plant than to install an additional solar and wind capacity. So in fact, I do agree with your point completely, and I'm very, let's say, aware that Armenia does need a new nuclear power plant, and hopefully I'm looking at options basically. And thorium, I'm a bit familiar with it from my studies, but I wouldn't say highly technically. So when I saw this, I just wanted to get more insight. Yes, thank you.
Let's add another equation into the conversation, and that's the energy return on investment. Now, can someone from our team drop in the ANSTO link to the thorium molten salt?
I'm just going to quickly put down the graph that you're looking at, and then I'll get the ANSTO link on.
That'll be great.
Just going to make it a lot easier. And then I'll also, Rudolf, firstly, that link that I just dropped in, that is for the general repository of molten salt data. And I will also drop in that what Jeremiah just talked about on the calculations. So just give me a second here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Diane.
So I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about this concept called energy return on investment. Everyone's familiar with financial return on investment, how much money do I put in, how much money do I get out? However, we all know that can be manipulated. We can externalize costs. We can bring in subsidies to inflate incomes. So ROI on an economic basis can be manipulated, and often is. Energy return on investment is the net in versus net out. That's a sort of all-inclusive measure. And the link that we'll put up soon in the chat is actually data that's put up onto the Australian Nuclear Science Office's website. So it's not our data. This information has been created by the Berlin Fission Institute. Has a long German name that I can't repeat, but that's the data comes, the studies come from them. But I'll just talk briefly what this energy return on investment is for molten salt. It's 2,000 to 1. So I'll start with the big number, or I'll start with a number, 2,000 to 1. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that if I put in 1 unit of energy, and that means from mining to processing to building the facility to extracting the energy, the ratio is 2,000 to 1. And there's documents you can study on that to understand that. Now, when you come back to, let's just say, go to the other extreme, solar power or photovoltaics, the EROI on that is 1.6 to 1. So that's like, hang on, did someone say a really low number? Yes, 1.6 to 1. Coal is 30 to 1, 30. Same, about similar to natural gas, about 30 to 1, whilst oil and solid fission are about 80 to 1. Meanwhile, hydroelectric, one of the best forms of renewable energy we have, is 100 to 1. So that's cool. Remember, I started with 2,000 to 1. So that's the real benefit of molten salt power generation from thorium, is this massive EROI. And when you come back to it, that's the underlying principle which supports any activity in this space. That's the net result. And just going back a little bit, I mean, I said before that oil was 80 to 1, similar to fission, solid fission at 80 to 1. That's why fission is so good just by itself. I mean, because if you're an oil country, and as we know, there are a number of oil countries around the world which are quite wealthy because they simply have abundance of energy. That equation is then tipped in your favor, like if you're France, for example, producing also almost 100%, not, it's just 75% of their energy comes from nuclear. So if you're a nuclear nation or an oil nation, you're going to be wealthy just because of this EROI. However, imagine what you would be if you were a nation producing energy from thorium molten salt with an EROI of 2,000 to 1. So I'll just leave everyone with that thought. And we'll go to the next question.
Can jump in, this will be a nice transition to a question that was asked by Dr. Askine Pasayan. And her question was, what's the applicability of thorium-based nuclear reactors for Armenia's case? So if there are any comment on the economic, technical, and geopolitical dimensions. And I think we touched a bit with economical in terms of the investment, considering that Armenia is a relatively small country and we don't have as large financial resources, you could say, as some other countries. And you were saying that thorium has an advantage from the energy return of investment. Could you add perhaps on technical or geopolitical dimensions, anything that you see here?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, Armenia is a very, very special country in the world because of its position, because of its many factors going on there. One of the advantages you have is you're small. So it's quite easy to move quickly in a small country to enact change. And there are lots of people who would be willing to support Armenia to install the right kind of energy system. And I know, I mean, the EU, they offered Armenia 200 million euros to decommission Metsamor after the earthquake in 1988, I think it was. So there's already money on the table, so to speak, to help Armenia to do lots of things. And we're quite willing to help Armenia to reach that funding as well. And we're quite capable of doing that now. So that's, and the size and the scale of a development program in Armenia to produce energy from molten salt could probably take between 5 and 10 years. And then Armenia could be effectively energy independent for the next 100, 200, 300 years. It's a very, very big step, a very small investment related to the benefit you get. Geopolitically, I don't see any inhibitions to that. Everyone is interested in their own energy independence. That's what every country would like to have. Russia is aware of that. I mean, I know Russia has plans for thorium molten salt that they don't tell anyone about. That's clear. That's just the way things work. However, in the long run, I mean, we know that Rosatom is very busy now building VVER 1200s around the world. A bit big for Armenia, maybe not, because that would actually provide 100% of of Armenia's energy, one VVER 1200. So, I mean, Armenia is like in a perfect position to decide what is going to be the future for Armenians from the energy perspective. And molten salt technology, thorium molten salt technology, gives you a huge ability to be your own masters from an energy point of view.
Thanks. And we had a couple of questions from Dr. Artak Hambaryan, and one of his questions that he had sent before regarding the cost of SMRs. And if you would have any comment, I may just add from my general knowledge that SMRs are not going to be per kilowatt that much different from standard nuclears, if I know. It's roughly $5 million per megawatt are the projected costs, but perhaps you have different numbers, and perhaps there is some special interplay with thorium SMRs.
Yeah, SMR. There's 6 categories of SMRs under the Generation 4 Forum environment. 6 categories. 5 of them are solid fuel fission systems. One of them is molten salt. And as Diana explained before, solid fission needs high pressure to become effective. And high pressure means high containment environment, which is a high risk of failure. So you have a lot of safety systems on that system, on a solid fission system, to stop it from becoming dangerous. However, when you get to molten salt is atmospheric pressure, high temperature, but so what? So is a steel furnace or a copper refinery. We're quite comfortable with high temperatures. But it's atmospheric pressure, which means if something goes wrong, it just stops. You know, things just fall on the ground. Okay, it's on the ground. So what? And being in a molten salt form, I mean, one of the advantages of a salt, everyone has it on their table. I have it on my table now. Sodium chloride, 2 highly reactive elements. When you put them together, they sit on, we put them on our kitchen table. So the typical salt for a molten salt thorium process would be a lithium beryllium fluoride process, salt. And the same way, very highly reactive elements put them together as a salt, and they're very stable, particularly at atmospheric conditions. So you end up with very, very less requirement to spend money on safety systems for molten salt technology. And as a result of that, we're estimating, and other people have done similar estimates, that the cost of a molten salt system is somewhere between 1 and 2 million per megawatt. You're getting down around the cost of the coal systems.
So it's much lower than what would be expected of a normal, which is usually about, I think, $4 to $5 million per megawatt, if I'm not mistaken. Or
that's true, and it gets up about around 7 and 8 when you start to actually do the work. So, but remember as well, fission is a very simple energy production system. You simply clean the fuel, keep cleaning it. You remove the 238, and the 235 gets hotter and hotter until it's getting hot by itself. That's all that fission is about. So the most of the money that you use for in the fission process is stopping it from getting too hot, and that's the safety systems which you put in place. That's the cost of a modern solid fission system.
So I think with all of these advantages that you've described, maybe certainly I and maybe some of the listeners have a question in our mind. So why hasn't it been, if it has so advantageous, is it that the technology is not there on commercial level yet? Is it simply political? There was political barriers. So what were some of the disadvantages that prevented thorium from developing so far? And connected to that, what do you see roughly the timeline, let's say within the next 10 or 20 years, when do you see the technology able to come in on commercial level, if it is at all predictable?
Well, it's very, very predictable. I mean, it would have been done by 1975 if the program had been funded back then. They proved the technology from 1965 to 1969, and now there's one running system in China. They're running it today. Turkey will have one running by 2025. This is public information. They'll have a 30 megawatt system running by then. The French probably have one running already, but I'm not going to tell anyone until they're comfortable with it. To answer your question, when will the first commercial one be ready? It's a matter of, well, no, actually, you had a more important question. Why hasn't it been done already? Simply because of the status quo. The fossil fuel industry is so strong. It's been strong for 160 years, maybe less, maybe 130 years. They have a lot of money, and they're quite adept at stopping competing technologies. We know that. One of the reasons, like I said before, is the funding of renewables is because they know that they will require the equivalent in capacity to be installed next to it, typically as a gas-fired installation. So molten salt is a new player to the table. It's very much like smartphone technology, but more important. Energy is far more important than smartphones, and just affects so many more people. So we can just simply say it comes down to business as usual. That's the reason why molten salt is not in. Had a very good conversation during the week with a very experienced person in the rare earth space and thorium space, and he used a very good word called legacy capital. So if you have an installation now of existing technology, you have a legacy in that capital that you want to maintain. And that's a very tempting reason to maintain that technology and to do whatever you can to avoid any new incumbents coming into the game.
Thank you. I think we have another question from Rudolf Yaganyan. He's raised his hand.
Yes, so there's one thing I wanted to ask as well. As far as I know, from the generation 4 reactors that are being developed now, there has also been, in research and design, attempts to design them so that there's hydrogen co-generation. So hydrogen is being also generated whilst as well as fission taking place. And this is just for the sake of Arta Kambaryan, who asked the question regarding hydrogen. In terms of molten salt reactors, then, is that a possibility or no?
Yeah, well, hydrogen. Do you want
Let
to
me
talk about it?
actually let me answer, Jeremiah, because I actually did
Go for
do
it,
work on this. To answer your question, yes and no. Producing hydrogen, you've got a variety of options. Electrolysis, there are some chemical options, but what most important, the question comes down to a variety of different things. There is one process which I actually worked on, which the heat requirements is about, speaking on correction here, about 600 degrees. And the molten salt can operate at 700-800 degrees. So you've got that delta T, which will allow you to work with, allow you to complete a thermochemical cycle. It's called the copper chloride thermochemical cycle. So the first answer is yes, you can get hydrogen out. And obviously also with electricity, if you go off and do some form of electrolysis. More than that, there are a couple of other options, but the heat requirements, I think the most common one, which uses some sort of a sulfur, is somewhere in the 900 to 1,000 degrees Celsius. That's the easiest answer I can quickly give you. Jeremiah, do you have something more to add on that?
You caught me with my mouth full. No, it's okay. I mean, hydrogen is a energy transfer system. It is not a form of energy or source of energy. It's kind of like a battery. So you need something to charge it up, and then you take it to your point of discharge, and then you use that energy. Hydrogen's the same. So don't think of it as a panacea. If your energy system to create that you use to put into the hydrogen is fossil fuel based, then you actually have no benefit whatsoever. So the other thing about hydrogen is it's a extremely small molecule. There's probably, just going back to the EROI, if it was available like gas, natural gas was, and hydrogen is a gas as well, the EROI would be about 60 to 1 because of the energy density of hydrogen is such that it gives out twice as much energy as a methane or an ethane gas, as an example. However, hydrogen is not naturally available. We have to make it. So there's a lot of things like, look, if you want to be in business, one person I know, talking about the mining example, he says there's a lot of ways of making money out of mining besides mining, and energy is pretty similar. And if you're going to make money, if you can put together a hydrogen company at the moment, it's pretty hot. People invest thinking they've got the next best thing. But when you really know what's going on, it's just a way of making money. It's not a way of making a robust energy strategy for a country. That's hydrogen. So my own views on hydrogen, I was very close to the ethanol business back 20 years ago when people were investing in ethanol. Same situation, the EROI for ethanol is between 0.9 and 1.1, and many companies went broke getting into ethanol. However, the individuals became independently wealthy because they were able to suck in lots of government money because they felt they were going to be, this is the new thing, ethanol. Brazil, still very strong in ethanol because they don't have natural resources and they like to be independent. And if you follow the geopolitics, South Africa, South America, has a lot of things going on down there. So Brazil produce ethanol for strategic purposes, not for economic purposes. So it's a different agenda. The benefit you get with molten salt is you're able to, for a low cost, produce energy. If you want to produce hydrogen, you can, because you've got a high temperature source. You can easily switch that into producing hydrogen. And you've also got strategic independence for energy production. So it's really the best of both worlds.
thank you for your response. I think you might have missed the question that I was asking, but in the end you got back to it. But yeah, so technically it is possible then to co-integrate as far as I understood, but I suppose that there's still some room for, let's say, development on this. But yeah, thank you for your response.
Yeah.
Rudolf, just sorry, Jeremiah, the point he made about the calculation about renewable energy, have a look in the chat. I put up a new picture, and that's just basically a picture of asking how many units do I need to get to 100%. And from that picture, you can see it's around 30 to 40 wind installations, independent wind installations, not wind turbines, that you need to get 100% of your energy required. I hope that gives you something to think about. Any more questions?
Yes, no, that does give me something to think about. Thank you for that. Yeah, and also thank you for sending me the links. Appreciate it much.
Pleasure.
All right, we're coming to the end soon. I wanted to ask you to just give us a couple minutes of what is the Thorium network about? So what is the point of the organization? I understand that it's the thoriumnetwork.com. You can anyone can visit to see what specifically you do. But if you could just give an overview of what do you see as your strategy and the role of the organization basically in the thorium energy in general.
Sure, I can give a few words on that. So our objective is to accelerate the adoption of energy production from thorium molten salt technology. That's our key focus. And when we look at the space, this actual business space or this industrial space, there is no industry, there is no business at the moment. It's still a lot of disparate companies working independently. Well, it definitely was 4 years ago. There's still a lot of reluctance from academia to pick it up, although we've actually formed what we call the University Guild between different universities in Canada, South Africa, Japan, Turkey, to bring together university level discussions on this. And our objective, like I said, is to maximize to accelerate the adoption of molten salt technology. To get there, we see we have to do certain other practical profit-centered activities. So we haven't mentioned the tie-up between rare earths and thorium, but pretty well wherever there's rare earths in the ground, most likely there'll be thorium there as well, simply because of the way that the minerals tend to come together. So there's already a industry or a market for rare earths. So we have technology which accelerates the production of rare earths. We have low cost means of producing rare earths, which we're promoting now. There's another industry in fluorochemicals, which needs to be developed. Fluorochemical industry is only 50 billion per year worldwide, and it needs to get very, very large for thorium molten salt to be a common practice. So that has to be developed. So we're working on that as well. So also in software development, we're busy in that sector as well as blockchain. So one of the key attributes of radioactive material is you need to know who has it and where is it at any point in time. Blockchain is a perfect tool for managing that. Our partner is IBM for that particular area of our focus. And so, like I said, objective is maximizing or accelerating the adoption of thorium molten salt, and we've built certain business strategies to get to that point. I've just mentioned 3 of them now: rare earths, fluorochemicals, and blockchain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think I don't see that there are any more questions, and we're approaching the end. I would like to thank then the Thorium Network team for coming here and sharing their ideas. And based on your story that you have been discussing with Armenia, the possibilities of using the fuel and developing the technology in Armenia, I think it's not unlikely that we will hear about you again, or perhaps even see you somewhere in Yerevan enjoying wine.
Yes.
And,
I like
to
that.
our listeners, in the next couple of weeks, and this meeting actually worked as a nice introduction. In the next couple of weeks, we'll probably have another presentation, this time on behalf of the National Future Energy Leaders. So it will be internal, not with an external guest, and we will be talking about the analysis and prospects of nuclear energy in Armenia. So it will be a sort of just general introduction and overview of nuclear energy in Armenia, and look out for the invitations for that. So thank you again, Jeremiah, everyone from the network, from the Thorium network, and hope to stay in touch and hear from you again.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.